Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to i612's panel on digital out of home. My name is Jack Harkness. I am the Director of Educational Events at i612. We have a great panel lined up for you today, so we'll jump on into it. And let me introduce our keynote, Ian Dallimore. Ian began his career with Lamar in 2004 and has had advanced through roles specializing in events and sports marketing, national sales, innovation, and digital out of home strategy. Throughout the years, his influence on technology, digital innovation, and sales strategy has strongly impacted both the out of home industry and Lamar's digital presence. Now, as Lamar's VP of Digital Growth, Ian works with programmatic SSPs, DSPs, and client brands and agencies to devise strategic plans for utilizing digital out of home. Welcome, Ian.
Yeah, thanks so much. And thanks for everyone for being there. Quick funny story is this conference I was most excited about because it was literally the last conference that I was to speak at and keynote just prior to COVID ruining all of our lives. So here we are. So glad we could do this virtually. I think I've had to change my slides a couple of times as the world has evolved. But again, thanks for having me. I'm the VP of Digital Growth and been with Lamar for 16 years. And what I'd like to talk to you guys today about is a little bit about the company. I know probably a handful of you guys know us, but Lamar's the largest outdoor company in the US. Really cool backstory on how we got started in 1902. But basically the story is the flip of a coin in Pensacola. We had an opera house and there was this little tiny bill posting company that simultaneously two best friends owned. And they had a falling out. So everyone wanted the opera house because that was the moneymaker. And we, Lamar, Charlie Lamar, lost. And here we are today, a $2.2 billion outdoor company. So we like to say that we've won. Just to kind of give you guys an idea of scale, because we are a smaller player to our friends Clear Channel and Outfront in Minneapolis, but across the US, we have over 350,000 signs, the US and Canada. The map just looks like someone just threw a bunch of darts on it. And more specifically, as it relates to this conversation in the panel, we have over 3,700 digital displays across 245 markets. And we continue to expand that network. But what I want to dive in today quickly is talk about two things, is the use of data, and which is my favorite side, but more on the side of how we're triggering creative as it relates to out of home and out of home campaigns. And then we'll dive into programmatic, which will nicely dovetail onto the panel with our great friends awaiting in the back room. So what Lamar does is we work with a data company. There's thousands of data companies that exist, but DigiChief is kind of our partner. And if you look at the screen here, we have everything from real-time traffic data to live scores to even flight data, time of day, even trending items. So think about grocery stores and restaurants that have real-time inventory availability management systems. We have that opportunity to tap into that and trigger creative content. And we'll share a couple of those examples. And everyone's favorite is what we call continuing the conversation with social. So how do we take a brand's Instagram page and stream it live, whether they're participating or the brand itself is sending live images or tweets to the digital board. So really what we're doing is just building out conditions, right? So if you take the weather, we'll take a campaign and say, okay, if it's raining, if it's sunny, or if it's snowing, we're going to preset these creative, and then we're going to let the data determine when and where to play in real time. So just as you see, or maybe in the past, I've heard on the radio, when it begins to rain, immediately every radio station has some sort of RainX ad that plays over audio. We're doing the same thing, but more importantly, we're doing it on a large scale and large format across a market or across multiple markets or across the entire DMA. Some of my most recent campaigns that we've done that I've really enjoyed that have used this conditional creative is what Hulu has done here. And they had a ton of different creative that existed based off of whatever the market conditions were in real time, which was a lot of fun. And it became more contextual. This is actually, for any of those on the call that are agencies or even brands, local brands, this is an actual company here in our headquarters in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where I am, and it's called Accutemp. And although they're still a small company, their creative was they dove head deep. They were like, awesome, we love data. Let's trigger content based off of it. And they kind of playfully, and it won a ton of awards locally and across the different ad clubs across the state, but really kind of playfully reiterating that, hey, it is often very hot in the South, but more importantly, kind of playing off of like 85 degrees hot, like our technicians, clear choice AccuTemp with clear skies, and so on. All the way to Hillshire Farms, based off of the conditions again. Too hot for broccoli cheese soup, go for a sandwich. Too rainy to grill, go for a sandwich, and so on. Oftentimes we do what we call database feed fields. So the client provides that real-time base creative. We're tapping into that live database feed, and then what you see is that real-time element. So Crown Royal every NFL and NBA season across our entire network. And as you could see behind you, this was last year. That's the Mercedes-Benz Superdome where the New Orleans Saints play. And basically across the entire US, Thursday night football, Monday night football, and all day Sunday, based on the teams that are playing, they're triggering real-time creative. And again, using that data allows that brand to be at the forefront while still providing some context. Most importantly, on Sundays is, hey, how's my team doing? What's the score? And then sometimes we have, again, brands that are sponsors like Cox Communications and the Oklahoma City Thunder. And they do this across all sports networks, across all markets, which is kind of cool. This is by far my favorite campaign that we've done in quite some time, or at least my time at Lamar. Long story short, I'm petrified of flying. I found this company called FlightAware, and what it does is it tracks where do you fly, where's your flight go from point A to point B. I happen to have some friends that worked at the creative agency that represents Delta and up in Portland, and we presented this concept. And they did a massive campaign online with Delta and Equinox. They were rolling out their new campaign called sweatlag.com. And what we told them was, hey, you're already going to buy digital in the market. Instead of just buying digital to promote that new A350, which is supposed to be a jet lag free flight, why don't we take those digital, we'll tap into real-time data, flight aware data, and based on the different flights that are over 5 hours, in real time, we'll trigger creative and it'll change based off of those flights as they land into LAX. So the dynamic component here is the flight number, DL2561, and where it's coming from, New York. And then obviously they have the rest of the creative campaign. And you can kind of see throughout here from Amsterdam. And again, this campaign won a lot of awards, but more importantly, you really couldn't fake this, because what Delta learned and their concern is most flights are delayed. So why don't we make sure we're using real-time data? Meaning you can't fake this campaign, because flight out of Tokyo, DL6 on average, it's terrible, I remember this, but on average, their flights are delayed by 45 minutes due to takeoff time, et cetera. So the ability to trigger when that flight landed in LAX and to have that play for the next 45 minutes, baggage claim, and so on, and then when they would pass by these boards were key, while still promoting the sweat lag campaign to the broader audience across LA. Another great campaign, again, utilizing data and technology. The short of this campaign was we installed digital cameras about a board ahead prior to the digital out of home board. We installed these cameras that would look at the front grille of the vehicles as they were approaching. And then within seconds, it would then determine what that vehicle was. And here, one of the Paramount Picture movies depicted whether you were a Decepticon or an Autobot for their movie premiere. And again, the ability to talk to specific cars, as you can see here, Toyota Camry, attention, your Toyota Camry is an Autobot. So really bringing it down to a one-to-one level while using data and technology was kind of neat. Same concept and campaign for Chevy Malibu release, but they went one step further. Based off of whatever vehicle you were driving, it would call out your vehicle, and it would also show the creative of that new vehicle, Chevy Malibu, in the color of your car. So in this case, the Hyundai Sonata was a white Hyundai Sonata, and Chevy Malibu was saying, we have more features and better than your car you're currently driving. We did some measurement data behind that, as well as some survey-based data to better understand, hey, did you notice that it was a one-to-one talk? Did this help elevate the brand itself, and did it drive you to look for a purchase of that vehicle? So diving into programmatic. So I'm not going to go deep into this because this is one of our first questions with our panel. But Lamar, in the industry itself, we've been doing programmatic on the short side about 4 years. Lamar's been in it for about 8. And one of our panelists, Lucy, will dive deeper into that and what programmatic is. But what it's really allowed us to do is to be more strategic and more automated while selling impressions in real time based off of a certain audience, an audience segmentation, and much more finite than just, hey, I want to target 18 to 34-year-olds. Think more, I want to target a 18 to 34-year-old that has visited an MLS stadium and has an affinity towards soccer and has purchased a pair of soccer cleats in the last 60 days. So the ability to be very targeted is key. So what does that ecosystem look like? And a lot of you guys on the call, you're very familiar with what the online ecosystem looks like, even the mobile side and CTV. But again, now the out-of-home space, digital out-of-home, has allowed us to sit in that ecosystem. So if you think about CTV, YouTube, Hulu, all the major players, obviously online, Amazon, Facebook, Google, whether they're walled gardens or not, mobile, you have MoPub, AppNexus, and then obviously the walled garden of Instagram. But now digital out-of-home plays in that universe. So as a marketer and advertiser logs into their different demand side platforms, they're now plugged into a much larger ecosystem and exchange, such as our friends on the call with Vistar, and the DSP side with our friends, Robbie, who's also on the panel at Adelphic. And they have the ability, so if you narrow it down to the out-of-home SSP side, which those are some of the partners in the space, and with our panelist, Eric, at GSTV, which is the gas station TV. Now, when you're buying, you're selecting that data audience, 18 to 34 soccer enthusiasts. You're now buying a real-time omni-channel approach. So what is that consumer's journey throughout the day? And how can I target them on their journey, whether it's on their mobile device, on their laptop, desktop, CTV, and now digital out-of-home fits in that space. And again, impression-based buys based off an audience. And as if that wasn't enough, we figured in this space, we need to measure, have the ability to allow for that consumer to be retargeted. So one of the features that we do in this space, and it's with our supply side partners, is do what's called device ID passbacks. And those who are in the digital world, they know that and understand anonymous device IDs, which are those who are exposed to the digital out-of-home ad, and then we overlay third-party measurement, and then that now gives that omni-channel approach where they can now buy CTV mobile and online and desktop by taking those anonymous device IDs and retargeting them, kind of in the example here. And some of the other ways that we're able to target, and I won't go into depth here, but I'll definitely share the presentation with everyone. But the use of behavioral patterns, so where does consumers go throughout the day? What is their journey? The use of first and third party data to extend an existing audience strategy in digital out of home, that's an amazing tactic. And as I went through the contextual triggers, so it's really important to understand that on obviously the mobile device and on the desktop, it's a one-to-one experience. We also need to understand that in the out-of-home space, although it's one-to targeted with a specific audience, you're able to have a much larger impact by reaching your audience with more relevant contextual ads using that contextual-based message that we kind of walked through today. And then we also have to be able to have some sort of attribution. So to kind of breeze through these, a handful of them are brand lift study. So those are typically survey-based attribution. Were you exposed to out of home? Have you seen this brand? What is your next step? To foot traffic. So who was exposed to the out of home? Where did they go on their journey? and we can verify, did they end up at a specific location, or even conversion pixels with sales lift. So same idea, where you exposed device ID passback, push a pixel, and now we can say, hey, they downloaded that app because they were exposed to that app ad on large format digital. So I know I breezed through a lot of that, but hopefully what it gives you guys, and if you're not already familiar, is the use of data has now become every day with the out-of-home publishers, and specifically with our programmatic side of our business in the out-of-home industry as a whole. I'll leave you with this. It's a shameless plug, but it's part of being a keynote. Rather than plug my kids, what I'd like to just talk about briefly is we've launched a podcast called Digital and Dirt. It can be found on Spotify, Pandora, iHeart, and plenty of other spaces. And we have some amazing guests, not only in the out-of-home industry, but you learn a little bit about the industry, learn a bit about that guest. And it's a great opportunity to kind of go deeper into maybe what we like to call, we're no longer your grandfather's outdoor industry, where it says exit here. It's now a data-driven industry that has some fantastic ways of really have a lasting impression for your brands that you guys represent. So we appreciate it. And I guess now if we can have the panelists jump in.
Great. Thank you so much, Ian. I'm going to do a little intro to our panelists and we'll get started. We have Lucy Markowitz, is the SVP of National US Sales at Vistar Media and leads brand and agency relationships in the US, helping cultivate partnerships with holding companies, independents, and the largest brands in the world. We have Eric Sherman, is an EVP of Insights and Analytics at GSTV. Reporting to the CEO, Eric oversees audience insights, ad effectiveness research, and data strategy. Before joining GSTV, Eric held senior insight roles at Twitter, NBCU Universal, and Clear Channel Outdoor. We have Robbie Barnett, oversees all inventory partnerships at Viant for the Adelphic platform, an industry-leading omni-channel DSP. The majority of Robbie's career has been spent evaluating media transactions for some of the world's largest brands across traditional, digital, and programmatic media channels. We have Andrew Steppen, who has been with Haworth Marketing and Media for 6 years, currently managing the out-of-home strategy and investment team. An advocate for out-of-home as an integral and relevant media channel. Andrew is passionate about the larger industry and is excited for its continued involvement. Thank you all for being here. We have Ian has graciously accepted the role in leading the discussion. So I will turn it over to you five, and thank you again all for participating.
Perfect. I think I was the last person to log on to a Zoom, how I got selected to be the moderator here. So we'll jump right in. Adrian, you and I have worked together for quite some time, probably all 60 years at Haworth. You've been exposed to digital out of home. You've done an amazing job of evangelizing it within Haworth itself. Maybe let's talk to the audience a bit about how currently driving excitement, how out of home has kind of become the buzzword again, right before COVID hit and as we kind of emerged out of it.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. So I think digital out of home as a medium itself has been in the industry long enough where itself as a medium and a tactic is commonplace and well known with advertisers and within media plans. Right now, it's about how to use digital out of home as a medium in creative ways, from not only a creative standpoint, to piggyback off of some of the dynamic and conditional creative ideas that you just outlined in your keynote. That's been key, but also how to integrate digital out of home as not a siloed media channel, but as an extension of existing media digital campaigns, and really treating digital out of home as another screen, if you will. And that screen can come in a lot of different shapes and sizes, from highway digital inventory to transit digital inventory, and place-based as well. And that list is expanding. From a strategic media standpoint, any well-rounded media plan that's going to drive a consumer down that funnel from awareness to consideration to conversion, having that top level funnel awareness support is crucial. And out of home, whether it's digital out of home or static printed out of home, is always going to be an effective and efficient way of providing that for a media plan. The use of digital out of home specifically, I think is becoming more and more crucial in media planning because everyone who has ever worked for an agency or is on the partner side of things as well knows that those timelines and lead times are constantly getting crushed and getting smaller. So digital out of home is a great solution to that, whereas a more traditional static plan might suffer. So that quick turn solution of assets is always really key.
Yeah, and a lot of great points there. So next question, we'll jump over to kind of dual, Lucy and Eric, both of you guys kind of take this one. We've seen massive advancements with both the media side and the publisher side. And I hate the word platforms because I know you guys aren't a platform at Vistar, but maybe the both of you kind of take that. How are you seeing the advancements of digital out of home kind of play out, especially over the last 3-4 years?
Yeah, so I can kick that off. You're not totally wrong. Vistar is also a platform. I think it fits too, but I think as a technology provider within out of home, Vistar does a lot of different things. And so, on one side, we do have a DSP, which I like to think about that as kind of the trading platform for buyers, be that a brand or an agency, to be able to get an understanding of the inventory that's available, be able to add all of those targeting parameters. And you talked about a lot of them in the onset of this presentation. Targeting can be anything from weather targeting to geo-targeting to day part to audiences, which is becoming a much more used practice within out of home of really targeting the right people in a one-to-many medium. And then within our SSP, it's about helping our media owners to increase the amount of revenue and reach that they can then get through that buying platform, whether it's our own or as an SSP partnering with other leaders within the ecosystem. I know Robbie, we work super close together. And so, Adelphic is one of the partners that we work with outside of the DSP that we have. And so I think in terms of the advancements, it's all about the data that we can bring to the table, the types of measurement that we can provide. But at the end of the day, you still have some of the elements that just exist without out of home that create challenges, which is, many of these screens have other priorities outside of just advertising. They're processing payments. They are providing other content to engage the user's experience. So, being able to continue to reach the right people in the right places, but also be interspersed between the other value that these screens bring has innate challenges. But I think that one of the most exciting pieces is that so many new screens and formats are continuing to pop up as a new way to engage with consumers as they move throughout their world. So I think there's a lot of excitement, but we still have to deal with the challenges of this being physical real estate that has other purposes outside of just advertising.
Yeah, I would echo everything Lucy said. For us, from our point of view, there's 3 things driving excitement in kind of the digital out-of-home space. There are growth, data, and versatility. And I think, Lucy, you touched on all of those. From a growth standpoint, we're seeing a lot of networks grow from these small niche players to big national networks. At GSTV, we now reach 40% of adults 18 plus on a monthly basis, which is just incredible. I think eMarketer predicted that digital out-of-home spending would grow 19% this year. We've seen our business grow even faster than that. So we're definitely seeing huge growth in the space. From the data standpoint, yeah, it's really from all angles, right? It's sort of broad-based audience measurement. We recently signed a deal with Comscore to do audience measurement for GSTV, which we're really excited about. Targeting, as Lucy touched on, As we've talked about today, the ability to reach that specific audience segment that you're looking for and using data to do that. And of course, using data to prove outcomes. So those two factors, growth and data, I think are really what's driving the third bucket of excitement, which is versatility. And there's a lot of ways you can do digital out of home in really cool ways, taking advantage of that real estate piece that Lucy was talking about. But I think what we're seeing more and more, because of the scale, because of the data, we're seeing advertisers thinking about digital out of home as a replacement for other media types, as a replacement for linear television, as a replacement for some really privacy challenged online media. So I think that's the third big thing that we're kind of excited about, digital out of home, kind of growing beyond just that kind of tactical classic out of home execution.
Yeah, and it's just to kind of touch on, because I often get asked the question like, hey, is static out of home dead? Not even close. I think in the ecosystem of out of home, and you touched on that a bit, Eric, on the ability to use real estate. There's different media types. Like not every transit screen needs to be a digital screen. The reemergence of QR codes as AR becomes really popular with mobile devices. There's a space for that. The ability to interact with an ad, and even just having a large format poster that sits on the side of the road. If done correctly, you can utilize that static brand to then play into a more specific niche audience. And so let's dive into that. Robbie, you and I met and you've become a great friend, and we've had a few tequilas in Vegas together. I'm gonna let you take what is programmatic out of home.
Yeah, so I guess we should probably define programmatic first, and
Please.
As our industry would have it, we probably all have different definitions, but I'll give you mine. To me, using software to facilitate the transaction of media is programmatic. So if I'm using media buying software like a DSP, it's programmatic. If I'm a media owner and I'm using a platform to sell media, it's programmatic selling. So to me, what's the difference between programmatic and non-programmatic is, well, are you using software to facilitate the transaction? The alternative would be an IO, negotiating it over email or on the phone. I used to be an IO-based buyer earlier on in my career. I never want to go back. There's a lot of inherent advantages using software. So I think that's the biggest sort of difference when you compare it to the traditional way to execute, is you're using software to facilitate the transaction. And you were kind of talking about this in your presentation, Ian, all of the different ways that you can actually buy through these platforms. And I think it's important to reiterate that, because that's another big differentiator between programmatic and direct. Like direct, you're cutting an IO, you send off the creative, and you just kind of like cross your fingers, right? You get the post-campaign report, and you're like, did we do okay, right? Mm-hmm. With programmatic, you can buy into a biddable environment, right? So you can define the value based off the outcomes that you can see coming through. You can buy in a preferred deal, so striking a deal with Lamar and say, hey, I want to buy this area for this price around this time. You could also, one of the newer advancements in out-of-home in specific, it exists in others, but in out-of-home specifically, is this idea around programmatic guaranteed transactions, where the media owner would reserve a bit of inventory and say, I'm going to send this over to you in your media buying platform with the understanding that you're going to bid and buy everything. So I can keep going, but I'll probably just stop there in terms of the big differences.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And does anyone else want to add to that, Andrew?
Yeah, sure. I think to kind of meld two different points together, Ian, your comments about whether or not static inventory is dead, and the discussion around programmatic, I think that's one good example of how both can go hand in hand. From a media planning standpoint, programmatic and automated digital out of home can be a really great tool to inform the rest of your media planning. Historically, out of home and the word data usually didn't mesh all that well, but that's obviously changing. So if we're engaging with a programmatic out of home buy, and we're seeing results that consistently light up inventory in a specific neighborhood or a specific intersection, it's probably then telling us and prudent of us as media planners to maybe perm out a static unit in that neighborhood to continue highlighting that audience and targeting that audience. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. They can help each other out in a lot of different respects.
Yeah, and one of the things I wanted to pull out of that, because those are all great points, is the word automation. So I think oftentimes that gets confused is, okay, programmatic is just an automated way. I don't have to deal with a rep. I don't have to deal with that, which is all myths, but the two are actually different, right? So Robbie touched on that, the ability to use data to overlay. What I've seen over the 8.5 years of Lamar playing in the programmatic space is some people come in and try to just substitute, and quickly they fall on their face. The campaign doesn't even win bids, and it's just not successful. But to make the point, as publishers for Eric and I specifically on this panel, we're focused on both, and programmatic has helped increase the ability for us to now talk to agencies like Haworth and others, where we say, okay, we provide Vistars of the world the API in real time. Let's do the same API on automated platforms, so where you can still buy traditional direct as well as, more direct IO business, static transit, subway, et cetera. So it's exciting because programmatic has increased that visibility of, hey, we have a tech problem, and now we're kind of morphing more into technology that just happens to have, in our case, 350,000 signs that we need to sell. So jumping to the next question that kind of dovetails into that, Lucy, what are advertisers saying about programmatic out of home? I know you talk to people like Robbie, and I'd love for him to chime in as well. And you go in and they're like the CTV agency and they're in the metaverse buying. And then you're like, hey, by the way, we have these large format roadside digital boards, we have transit and elevator. Like how's that first pitch? And then how is it being perceived today?
Yeah, so I think the first element is sort of starting with that higher level story of what are we even trying to bring to your buyer? Like it should all start with a value proposition of less of like, what am I selling you? And more about why is this something that you should care about and that your buyer or your brand that you work with, if it's an agency, should care about. So I think the first element there is access. So first, sort of starting with what inventory is actually available programmatically. And, you of course named a number of those different formats, everything from, billboards that are roadside to airports, gas stations, office buildings, grocery stores, gyms. There's obviously a very wide variety of screens that have different value for different types of clients. Funny enough, like right before this, I got off a lunch and learn with a particular agency that sells to a lot of CPG brands. The way they're going to approach out of home is going to be completely different than an auto brand, where they might care a lot more about roadside versus CPG cares about point of purchase targeting as well as the path to purchase. And then thinking about what data they're going to care about. CPG brands might care about purchase level data that's coming from companies like IRI or NCS, whereas an auto brand certainly doesn't care about who's buying ice cream. They care about who's buying cars or, where to luxury consumers live. So I think it's all about understanding what a client is trying to do. And then instead of giving them just the high level, walking them through something that's applicable. And then the next piece is also sort of taking, instead of just catering to the audience that's in the room, giving suggestions of who they should be leaning on to intersperse that expertise around that automation and software, who is going to help with activating the buy. But also, as you mentioned, like you could set up your whole buy, you think you're doing a great job and you don't really know much about out of home. And then maybe you bought in venue types you didn't really want to be in. So making sure that you're also using those experts, whether that's out of home teams, whether that's talking to the publishers on the other side and getting a better understanding of their inventory. And so that doesn't need to be for every single campaign necessarily. I think people start learning the ropes and they don't necessarily have to lean on every single person for every buy, but especially in the beginning, forming those relationships and making sure that like your knowledge is at least at a certain level, I think is super important to being successful.
Yeah, Robbie, maybe touch on that, because I love that. When we first launched programmatic, and I know our friends at a handful of other platforms, I would even call Lucy up and be like, hey, they purchased 12 spots, which equates to like 5,000 impressions, which means they maybe hit barely anyone. So maybe touch on that, and then maybe add a little bit more color to Lucy's comments as well.
As Lucy had a lot of good stuff in there. I'll start with what you just mentioned, though. I think, and this is probably just be a larger theme of the conversation, but I think one of the challenges with programmatic out of home is just there is a learning curve. You have to spend the time to understand the nuances, especially when you're talking to an agency or a buyer that is more traditionally focused, right? So a lot of people are like, CTV is the answer to everything right now, right? And a lot of what we do in terms of our education is, to Lucy's point, trying to figure out the outcomes and then recommending a media strategy from there. And I think one of the things that we've been spending a lot of time with is, look, out of home now serves a lot more use cases than you would think instinctively, right? So when we think, a lot of people, when you think out of home, you think Lamar, right? Like 100-year-old plus company, big, roadside, and you're like, yes, upper funnel, billboards. This is exactly where it fits. But we're actually seeing it fit in, and this is kind of what Andrew was saying, is a little bit further down the funnel as well. So mid and even lower funnel tactics. So I think out of home serves a wider range of use cases and applications than it has before. And so that education piece is critical, right? And being able to show data and results and case studies to sort of highlight some of this information. In addition to that, being able to use a platform that buys across a number of formats. You can see in real time, these guys are all competing against each other now, right? You're using impressions, you're looking at reach, you're looking at results. And you might say, like, you might see intra-campaign, hey, this out-of-home buy is actually outperforming this other channel significantly. Now I have a chance to reallocate it. So back to your original question, like how do those conversations go when you're talking to an omni-channel buyer? Where does digital out-of-home fit in? It's usually talking about all the use cases and all of the different examples you mentioned earlier, and say, give it a shot. Let's learn as we go into with the campaign, and if it's doing really well, we should certainly reallocate. And those are for people that are just starting to test the water. But it's always been advantageous. To be honest, out of home, like I said, I'm pretty much a career media buyer. I think out of home is really undervalued right now in terms of programmatic out of home. And so the advertisers that spend the time to understand the format are really going to cash in on it now. But there is some upfront work.
Yeah, and I just want to add one thing to what Robbie was saying, which is just around, this isn't an all or nothing. It's not like you buy out of home and then you don't buy mobile, you don't buy CTV. The idea, especially when you're talking to an omni-channel buyer, is how all these formats work together. And that even can relate to a static element being a part of a plan that you're doing too. All these elements have a part to play, but they also have to prove their value. And so I think Robbie made a lot of good points about how to think about it and sort of distilling it down, but then also looking at the big picture as well.
Well, and I think, Andrew, I'm gonna let you make your point, because I want you to answer that. Is, as a media buyer, and what I love about Haworth specifically is you buy all media and you're always intertwined and you're sitting with the different media types. I almost feel that programmatic allows for those campaigns to just be more robust, where the out-of-home shop only buys the out-of-home and the mobile only buys the out-of-home and this team only buys, and there's no real synergies, even all the way down to creative. So maybe touch on that, and then where I rudely interrupted, you're about to jump in, which is why I don't like Zoom conferences.
I know Zoom is tough. No, that's okay. The only other point I was going to make about what agencies and advertisers are talking about when it comes to programmatic out of home, sometimes it's actually not all that complicated. The audience targeting is great and kind of a cherry on top, but man, 9 times out of 10, it's really about that ease of execution and automation and condensed lead time that is the biggest sell. Can we send a company like Vistar 2 creative files, have them resize, and can we be up in 10 markets across multiple screens in 48 hours? Great. That is becoming really crucial. for a lot of advertisers is that quick lead time. In terms of what you mentioned, Ian, just now, you know, as Haworth being a full service media agency, out of home is sometimes relegated to a corner, a small piece of the pie and a small piece of the puzzle. And one thing that we advocate for as out of home specific buyers, while also having our tentacles out talking to these other media groups within our same agency, is that out of home is crucial, to everyone else's point, in that full funnel, robust media plan. You know, if you're looking for direct response from consumers, and you're looking for conversions, and maybe those conversions are lacking, maybe that's because they're not aware of your brand and they don't know where to get in touch with your brand. Out of home can be a perfect solution to that, and it is overlooked. So it's something that we advocate for, and make sure that our advertisers are aware of as an option.
Yeah, and so jumping to the next thing, and Eric is our panelist, token, data guy, measurement guy. I'd love for you to kind of give a broader scope on what does it mean? Because oftentimes when I present, like, hey, it's very simple. We take device ID, expose to that billboard or that gas station, and then here we see where it moves throughout the day. Maybe give a high level of what does measurement and attribution look like for digital out of home specifically today, and specifically in your role at GSTV.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think, you know, what I would say is measurement and attribution for digital out of home today looks a lot like measurement and attribution for TV or digital media. And that's what's so exciting about it. You know, you can know down to very specific audience segments who you're reaching, and you can quantify valuable actions that those people performed, right? The business outcomes from a campaign, huge buzzword right now amongst us token measurement people. The audience measurement side, you know, we're now working with ComScore to do audience measurement for GSTV, which is exciting. They're a new player in the out-of-home space, so they'll give us things like reach and frequency and demos. And what we're really excited about is to be included in the same tools that ComScore builds for digital and for television. So we're really going to be considered, you know, amongst other media types. And then on the attribution side, you know, as I said, we're totally focused on business outcomes, right? So demonstrating incremental impact on any KPI that an advertiser cares about. So if it's foot traffic, great, we'll work with Foursquare. If it's CPG sales lift, we'll work with someone like IRI. TV tune-in, right? Let's say ABC advertises on our network. We'll work with ComScore to show an actual, you know, incremental impact on television tune-in. And the list goes on.
Yeah, and I think that one of the most exciting things is whenever, and I think Lucy and I have been on a few calls together where you'll say like, hey, we use Kachava now to measure app downloads out of home. And then immediately the digital agency's like, oh, perfect. We use Kachava for our online and mobile sector. So you make a great point there, Eric. It's using apples to apples data, but also using the same measurement companies and attribution companies. All right, so I didn't tell you we were going to do this, but I want you guys to give me kind of an example. Andrew as the agency, Robbie as the DSP, and Lucy as the supply side tech platform. Give our audience a little bit of an example of how a brand is using programmatic out of home and measurement, and what does that look like, and what is the final product, or as I mentioned in the keynote, the device ID passback look like? Whoever wants to go first.
I'll go first. Okay. So I thought Eric summed it up really well, and you teed it up too really well as well, Ian. Is there's so many different ways to measure this stuff, right? And certainly in out of home and in relation to an omni-channel strategy, it starts to get a little bit more complicated. While there are similar vendors, measurability across formats, across walled gardens gets difficult. So really, as a agency or a brand, I think coming up with an agreed upon fundamental way to measure this thing at the beginning is critical. And when I say this thing, I mean out of home and an omni-channel strategy. right? And so what we've seen a number of different takes. We've seen some people that are just hyper-focused on attributable outcomes. They want to know for every single impression served, what happens, right? And there are challenges when you take that approach. And we've also seen brands that say, I understand that there are going to be some gaps in measurement across all these formats. There's overlap that you can't account for. I'm going to do something a little bit more broad, a little bit more directional, and do like lift studies, identifying control and exposed markets that are very similar, zip codes, and looking at what happens when out of home is applied versus when it is not. We did this for very big gaming brands. Last year, we identified 2 markets where out of home was on, where out of home was off. They were very similar. Our data science team did, you measure like the age, gender, the jobs in the area to try and understand that these areas geographically are very similar. And we saw a significant lift in lower funnel metrics like website visitation, signups, and downloads when out of home was on the plan. So it's kind of goes back to what Andrew's been saying this whole time. It's like, look, you need a very balanced, holistic, full funnel strategy, because it'll result in lower level measurable outcomes. And we saw that last year when they were taking sort of a lift approach. It resulted in some of these lower level outcomes.
Yeah, I guess from an agency perspective, we work with quite a few larger retailers. I'll let everyone look up who those are, who have used programmatic out of home pretty extensively over the past few years. I think, I don't know if this is answering the question specifically, but one thing that's always difficult is defining what optimization means within this space. Does it mean just making sure that we're pacing and delivering on impressions and shifting things around on a weekly or monthly basis? Or is it something deeper than that? And it should be, right? And one way that we've tried and have been fairly successful at is not only just looking at KPIs from an impression standpoint, but making sure that we're layering in those attribution studies and really understanding if we're engaging in a cross-screen multiple vendor programmatic buy, what's floating to the top and what's not driving that awareness or whatever the goals of the campaign are. So that's always been kind of a key point of contention and something that's been difficult to arrive at, but it's something that's possible and should be discussed prior to starting a programmatic campaign.
Yeah, and Andrew, I think that actually like dovetails perfectly into, obviously, we've had some great experience working with you in particular, and some of those retailers, and I think, part of it is setting those right expectations up front about what's possible, and sometimes those are hard conversations that is about what we can and can't do and what a client can expect. And I think it's always better to let a client know, like, hey, at this budget level, we're going to get a top line breakout that's going to kind of give a sense of success overall, but it's really not going to give us the ability to optimize and see which parts of the campaign worked. Now, if we look at a budget of X where, we have this much devoted to these markets and to these venue types, now we start getting into more granular figures. We can start understanding which markets are performing, which venue types are performing. And maybe if your campaign is of a long enough length, we can take a second at that mid-campaign level and start moving budgets around and actually making optimizations, or at least giving the brand the opportunity to do so versus just saying, here you go. The other thing is around how you set up the studies. A very basic brand study where you just ask, like, are you aware of this? Will you consider this brand? We have the ability to also ask more custom questions, understanding what's the creative going to say. So making sure that the questions are pertaining to maybe not just the brand level, but the specific product. And then maybe asking questions about use cases, et cetera. And so I think part of it is working together. When I've worked with Andrew in the past, it's kind of Vistar as the DSP, but in many cases, I'm working with Robbie's team as the SSP, where we want to partner together and see collectively what can we bring to the table. Adelphic has foot traffic solutions in-house. There are solutions Vistar has, and what we want to make sure is that we're partnering together and bringing the client the best set of opportunities collectively, and really acting as good partners in that way, and kind of knowing our role within the transaction, but also making sure that we're providing all the expectations so that nobody's blindsided, whether that's the brand, the agency, the technology partner you're working with, or anyone that's kind of involved in the equation.
Damn it, I did it. Stayed on mute. So I know we have about 5-6 minutes left. We want to kind of open it up to the audience, virtual audience. And if you guys have questions, if you want to pipe those into the chat, I'll check those out. And if you have no questions, not to worry, I have more questions to ask the panelists. So as these come in, I do have a great question I want to ask, and it can kind of, we'll let Eric talk about from the publisher's perspective, but and I really can't wait for us, and we all have to promise at the end of this year, we're not going to talk about like, hey, how did y'all do in the pandemic? But so we're going to ask it here. Eric, GSTV and just as a whole, how has the out-of-home industry overcame during the pandemic, and how have you kind of come out of it?
Yeah, we were really fortunate throughout the pandemic. GSTV, our footprint is located fuel and convenience locations throughout the country. Fueling up is really sort of an essential business, and people continue to drive and need fuel, and also liked going to convenience stores during the pandemic as well, right? Trying to avoid larger retailers in some cases to go to smaller format stores. So from an audience perspective, we didn't see too much of a dip, and we continued to add screens at locations throughout the country. So from an audience standpoint, from a business standpoint, we did fine this year. It has been great. But we are seeing some differences. We are seeing some changes, not necessarily good or bad. And they sort of mirror changes and trends that you can kind of read about in the general press. From a mobility standpoint, like I said, people are getting gas just as much as they used to, just kind of at different times and in different places. So, a lot of folks have relocated during the pandemic. So actually, one of the largest increases in fuel transactions that we saw last year was in Bozeman, Montana, which is like a really popular vacation kind of resort destination, which is cool. Also big increases in Florida as well. So it's been fun to use our transaction data to take a look at that. And the other thing we're seeing is what's called the donut effect. And by that, I mean sort of central cities, central urban areas sort of depopulating a bit with folks moving out to the suburbs, which of course has been a boon to GSTV. Obviously people using transit less, public transportation less, relying more on their cars in suburban environments. So that's been a trend that we've seen as well.
Yeah, so Andrew, touch on that a bit. What we've seen as an industry as a whole is that, as states have opened up, Texas, Florida, obviously opening up quicker, the South opening up faster, we now see budget shifts. How does that education process look like internally within the agency?
It's tough.
Yep.
It's really tough. That when things really got bad early last year, it was a panic, right? Nobody's leaving their homes. We have to pull all of our outdoor spend. And from there, to echo some of Eric's sentiments, from there, it's just been about re-educating ourselves as planners about where our audiences are throughout their day, and then shifting our recommendations accordingly. That urban versus suburban shift has been huge, even though I think we're starting to see a bit of a swing back to the norm. We really shied away from downtown core business center inventory for a long time. Transit has been a tough sell. For a while, anytime we were going into a media presentation with our client, the whole discussion had to be prefaced with where is the industry at, where are impressions at, and where is our audience at, and having to educate them. And there's different factions of opinion, and there's different points of data to pull from. So it's a complicated conversation to have because the situation is constantly changing, and as we've all experienced, it's really difficult to predict. I don't think anyone thought at the beginning of the summer that we'd be dealing with the Delta surge and having to reshift plans again that were planned at the more optimistic period of the summer.
Yeah, and so Lucy, why don't you end us on that topic, because I personally think that's become the positive, is that people are starting to see like, oh wow, there are billboards outside of Times Square and Sunset in Chicago. Maybe touch on that to kind of wrap up the importance of trusting the data and selling through why it's important. You trust it in mobile, online, and social. So why wouldn't you do the same in out of home?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that the data does tell a very powerful story. And so one, around just the markets, being able to shift where you want to be based on where people are. You know, we can show the data, or it's the same data that's being shown in the New York Times of like where people are moving. It doesn't have to be just coming from a company, I should say, not someone, but a company that seems to have like selfish intent. And I think that's part of it, is making sure that it's data that people do trust, and it doesn't feel potentially like it doesn't match up what people are seeing. So I'm calling it sort of like this new calibration of using data and then also seeing what you're actually experiencing and what people around you are. I think a great example is like last summer, one of our sellers in Chicago was having pushback from a client. They didn't really want to buy at a home. They were like, no one's on the roads. And it took her like, I think I want to say like 6 or 7 hours to get somewhere that should have taken 2.5. And so she took pictures along the way of herself stuck in traffic, or like screaming 2-year-olds in the back. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of like, yes, we're showing you the data, but I'm also showing you my real life. Same thing. Yeah. Right now I'm calling in from home, but I go into the office 2 days a week. Like, obviously we can see that, you know, you and Eric are both in an office. Andrew, I can't tell if that's just a really cool wallscape in your house or if you're in the office too.
I'm not that creative, so it's the office.
So, you know, it's like when we're saying people are going back, people are commuting again, like we're the image of that. It's half and half. It's not all or nothing. And so we can trust a mix of the numbers, but also like the real life that we're all living.
Yeah. So although data is extremely important, intuition is at the end of the day going to most likely match the data. So look, audience, it's been a pleasure. Hopefully you've learned a bit. This is literally, and I've been in the industry for 16 years. These are some of the most brilliant people in the space. So Andrew, Eric, Robbie, and Lucy, thank you guys so much. And thanks for all of your insights. And thank you for letting us dive a little bit deeper into your brains today.
Thank you. Thanks all.
Thank you guys.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate you all hopping on and being a part of this panel. Thank you, everyone who came and participated, attended, and everything. Just want to do a couple quick mentions. Just remind your colleagues and remind yourself, if you have changed jobs or anything recently, please email the i612 Gmail at i612mpls@gmail.com. Just give us your updated email address, contact info, and everyone. And we can get you invites out to all of these social and educational events that we'll have in the future. Speaking of social events, we have 2 more coming up this year. We have Halloween and our holiday event. We're still looking for a handful of sponsors. So if you know anyone that would like to sponsor an event, please have them reach out to us, and we'd be more than happy to chat with them. Again, thank you everyone for participating. Thank you everyone who sponsored this event and previous events and future events. any questions or comments, again, shoot us an email. But thank you, everyone, for the third time. And hope you all have a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.